One moment, the prisoner was bearing down on it. The next, the lizard was on the other side of the arena. Bare seconds later, it had slammed into the prisoner, pinning him to the ground as he screamed, its poison dripping over his face, leaving smoky trails wherever it touched his skin. The creature dropped its weight on the prisoner with a sickening crunch, and set slowly about mauling his shoulders as he lay there shrieking. The crowd was booing. Nina averted her eyes, unable to watch. "What is this?" "Welcome to the Hell Show," said Kaz. Pekka Rollins got the idea a few years back and pitched it to the right council member. "The Merchant Council knows?" "Of course they know, Nina. There's money to be made here." Nina dug her fingernails into her palms. The condescending tone made Kaz so slappable. She knew Pekka Rollins' name well. He's the reigning king of the barrel, the owner of not one, but two gambling places, one luxurious, the other catering to sailors with less to line their pockets, and several of the higher-end brothels. When Nina had arrived in Ketterdam a year ago, she'd been friendless, penniless, and far from home. She'd spent the first week in the Kirch law courts, dealing with the charges against Matthias. But once her testimony was complete, she'd been unceremoniously dumped at First Harbor, with just enough money to book passage back to Ravka. Desperate as she'd been to return to her country, she'd known she couldn't leave Matthias to languish in Hellgate. She had no idea what to do, but it seemed rumors of a new Grisha Korpelnik in Ketterdam had already circulated through the city. Pekka Rollins' men had been waiting for her at the harbor with the promise of safety and a place to stay. They'd taken her to the Emerald Palace, where Pekka himself had leaned heavily on Nina to join the Dime Lions, and had offered to set her up in business at the sweet shop. She'd been close to saying yes, desperate for cash and terrified of the slavers who patrolled the streets. But that night, Inej had crawled through her window on the top floor of the Emerald Palace with a proposal from Kaz Brecker in hand. Nina could never figure out how Inej had managed to scale 6 rain-slick stories of stone in the middle of the night, but the Dreg's terms were far more favorable than those offered by Pekka and the Dime Lions. It was a contract that she might actually pay off in a year or two if she was smart with her money, and Kaz had sent the right person to argue his case. A Sully girl with just a few months younger than Nina, who had grown up in Ravka, and who had spent a very ugly year indentured at the menagerie. "What can you tell me about Per Haskell?" Nina had said that night. "Not much," Inej had admitted. "He's no better or worse than most of the bosses in the barrel." "And Kaz Brecker?" "A liar, a thief, and utterly without conscience. But he'll keep to any deal you strike with him." Nina had heard the conviction in her voice. "He freed you from the menagerie?" "There was no freedom in the barrel, only good terms. Tanta Helene's girls never earned out of their contracts. She makes sure they don't." Inej had broken off then, and Nina had sensed the vibrant anger coursing through her. "Kaz convinced Per Haskell to pay off my indenture. I would have died at the menagerie." "You may still die in the dregs." Inej's dark eyes had glinted. "I may, but I'll die on my feet with a knife in my hand." The next morning, Inej had helped Nina sneak out of the Emerald Palace. They'd met with Kaz, and despite his cold ways and those strange leather gloves, she'd agreed to join the Dregs and work out of the White Rose. Less than 2 days later, a girl died at the sweet shop, strangled in her bed by a customer dressed as Mr. Crimson, who was never found. Nina had trusted Inej, and she hadn't been sorry for it, though right now she just felt furious with everyone. She watched a group of the Dime Lions prod the desert lizard with long spears. Apparently, the monster was sated after its meal. It allowed itself to be herded back into the tunnel, its thick body moving side to side in a lazy, sinuous roll. The crowd continued to boo as guards entered the arena to remove the prisoner's remains, tendrils of smoke still curling from its ruined flesh. "Why are they complaining?" Nina asked angrily. "Isn't this what they came here for?" "They wanted a fight," said Kaz. "They were expecting him to last longer." "That is disgusting." Kaz shrugged. "Only disgusting thing about it is that I didn't think of it first. These men aren't slaves, Kaz. They're prisoners. They're murderers and rapists, and thieves and con artists. Your people. Nina. They aren't forced to fight. They line up for the chance. They earn better food, private cells, liquor, yurta, conjugals with girls from West Stave. Listen cracked his knuckles. Sounds better than what we got at the Slat. Nina looked at the people screaming and shouting. The barkers walking the aisles taking bets. The prisoners of Hellgate might line up to fight. The Pecorons made the real money. Helvar doesn't fight in the arena, does he? We aren't here for the ambiance, said Kaz. Beyond slappable. Are you aware that I could waggle my finger and make you wet your trousers? Easy, Heartrender. I like these trousers, and if you start messing with my vital organs, Matthias Helvar will never see sunshine again. Nina blew out a breath, and settled for glowering at no one. Nina, Inej murmured, don't you start on me. It will all work out. Let Kaz do what he does best. He's horrible, but effective. Being angry at Kaz for being ruthless is like being angry at Stoat for being hot. You know what he is. Nina crossed her arms. I'm mad at you too. Me? Why? I don't know yet. I just am. Inej gave Nina's hand a brief squeeze, and after a moment, Nina squeezed back. She sat through the next fight in a daze, and the next. She told herself that she was ready for this, to see him again, to see him here in this brutal place. After all, she was a Grisha, and a soldier of the Second Army. She'd seen worse. But when Matthias emerged from the mouth of the cave below, she knew she'd been wrong. Nina recognized him instantly. Every night of the past year, she had fallen asleep thinking of Matthias's face. There was no mistake. The gilded brows, the sharp cut of his cheekbones. But Kaz hadn't lied. Matthias was much changed. The boy who looked back at the crowd with fury in his eyes was a stranger. Nina remembered the first time she'd seen Matthias in a moonlit Kalish wood. His beauty had seemed unfair to her. In another life, she might have believed he was coming to rescue her. A shining savior with golden hair and eyes of the pale blue of the northern glaciers. But she'd known the truth of him by the language he spoke, and by the disgust of his face every time his eyes lightened her. Matthias Helvar was a Druskill, one of the Fjordan witch hunters tasked with hunting down Grisha to face trial and execution. Though to her, he'd always resembled a warrior, a saint, illuminated in gold. Now he looked like what he truly was, a killer. His bare torso seemed hewn from steel. And though she knew it wasn't possible, he seemed bigger, as if the very structure of his body had changed. His skin had been gilded honey, now was fish belly white beneath the grime, and his hair. He had such beautiful hair, thick and gold, worn long in the way of the Fjordan soldiers. Now, like the other prisoners, his head had been shaved, probably to prevent lice. Whichever guard had done it had made a mess of the job. Even from this distance, she could see the cuts and nicks on his scalp, and little strips of blonde stubble in the places the razor had missed. And yet, he was beautiful still. He glared at the crowd, and gave the wheel a hard spin that nearly knocked it off its base. Tick, 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 tick. Snakes, tiger, bear, boar. The wheel ticked merrily along, then slowed and finally stopped. No, Nina said as she saw where the needle was pointing. It could be worse, said Muzzin. Could have landed on the desert lizard again. She grabbed Kaz's arms, through his cloak, and felt his muscles tense. You have to stop this. Let go of me, Nina. His gravel-rough voice was low, but she sensed real menace in it. She dropped her hand. Please, you don't understand. If he survives, I'll take Matthias Helvar out of this place tonight, but this part is up to him. Nina gave a frustrated shake of her head. You don't get it. The guard unbolted Matthias's shackles, and as soon as the chains dropped into the sand, he leaped onto a ladder with the announcer to be lifted to safety. The crowd screamed and stamped, but Matthias stood silent, unmoving, even with the gate opened, even when the wolves charged out of the tunnel. 3 of them snarling and snapping, tumbling over one another to get to him. At the last second, Matthias dropped into a crouch, knocking the first wolf into the dirt. then rolling right to pick up the bloody knife the previous combatant had left in the sand. He sprang to his feet, blade held out before him. Nina could sense his reluctance. His head was cocked to one side, and the look in his blue eyes was pleading, as if he was trying to engage the two wolves circling him in some silent negotiation. Whatever the plea might have been, it went unheard. The wolf on the right lunged. Matthias crouched low and spun, lodging his knife into the wolf's belly. It gave a miserable yelp, and Matthias seemed to shudder at the sound. It cost him precious seconds. The third wolf was on him, knocking him to the sand. Its teeth sank into his shoulder. He rolled, taking the wolf with him. The wolf's jaws snapped, and Matthias caught them. He wrenched them apart, the muscles of his arms flexing, his face grim. Nina squeezed her eyes shut. There was a sickening crack. The crowd roared. Matthias kneeled over the wolf. Its jaw was broken, and it lay on the ground twitching in pain. He reached for a rock and slammed it hard into the poor animal's skull. It went still, and Matthias' shoulders slumped. The people howled, stomping their feet. Only Nina knew what this was costing him, that he had been a Druskill. Wolves were sacred to his kind, bred for battle like their enormous horses. They were friends and companions, fighting side by side with their Druskill masters.